Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate, and today we are going to be discussing the potential threat of some severe weather that could last here from Thursday into a very strong overnight threat on Friday. Yes, nighttime storms on Friday, as well as the severe weather threat that will linger into Saturday. But before we get started, I'm going to have to ask you all, do me a favor, take the time to subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family, like the video. By liking the video, you actually put this on YouTube's algorithm, and it tells more people to get the word out, or it tells YouTube's algorithm to send this video, put this video on more people's recommended feeds. So that would be greatly appreciated if you all did that. Follow me on my social medias, including my Discord, which is in the description down below. And yeah, that will basically be all of my shameless plug. Let's get into the real plug, which is this weather here for today and tomorrow. So a marginal risk, an expansive marginal risk here for parts of southern Mississippi, southeastern parts of Louisiana, down towards the Pensacola areas near Mobile, Alabama, all the way up into places like Atlanta, all the way up towards the Appalachians and the Carolinas and Tennessee vicinity, including a little bit of Nashville. Maybe Nashville's a bit too far west of this event, but going on into Knoxville, Louisville, Cincinnati, Columbus, all the way up into places like Detroit. So if you live in these areas, you have a marginal risk today for hail, which can be in upwards of 1 inch in some spots, some gusty winds in upwards of 58 miles per hour, and then a 2% chance for tornadoes, except for if you live up near Toledo and Detroit. There is your risk for tornadoes has been cut a little bit short, so it's more or less a gusty wind threat, and that's the same thing with the hail. Your hail threat has been cut a bit short, especially if you live near like Cincinnati, Columbus, all the way up into Detroit. It'll be more or less a risk for wind for you all. Here's the day 2 outlook by the Storm Prediction Center. If you guys were on my live stream yesterday, which the live stream was very successful, to all the people who came out, I just want to tell you all, you guys are amazing, and I just want to thank you all so much for coming out. That was just absolutely mind-blowing as to what you all did. But if you guys were here in my live stream yesterday, they issued an emergency outlook for this area right here. They added a 3 out of 5 for the severe weather scale, and they have expanded that. Sorry for blinding you all, but they have expanded that enhanced risk further into places like Dallas, Fort Worth, and so a massive enhanced risk has been issued for these areas from, as I said, Dallas, Fort Worth, all the way over into Shreveport, Monroe, all the way through Alexandria, moving all the way into Jackson, Mississippi, maybe towards Columbus, Mississippi. So if you live over there, you guys have an enhanced risk issued for your area. There's also a slight risk, which is surrounded basically around that. That'll include Memphis, Little Rock, all the way around through towards places like Lake Charles, maybe a little bit of New Orleans. Maybe New Orleans is a bit farther south of that. Biloxi, Mobile, as well as Birmingham and the Tuscaloosa areas. So if you live in those areas, you have a 2 out of 5 2 out of 5 on the severe weather scale. And then your marginal extends all the way from the areas surrounding the slight risk all the way up into the Appalachians in the Carolinas. Your risks here are a lot more significant than what it is here on day 1 on today. Your hail risk, a 30% chance for significant hail. There's a lot of energy out here, and there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of lapse rates that are pretty high for the most part. So there's a lot of potential for very large hail in places like Dallas, Fort Worth. The only question that we have is there too much of a limiting factor to limit these thunderstorms? Will thunderstorms even develop in some of these areas? That is the main question we have right now. But for the most part, you have your 30% chance, which is issued over places like Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Plano, Garland, Texas. So if you live over there, you guys could see some very widespread hail, but you also have this little black circle with dotted lines in it, and that is your hatched risk. Your hatched risk can actually indicate some significant severe conditions, which will be indicative of you seeing hail in upwards of 2 inches in some spots. So that is some 100% damaging hail that will do damage to sidings and roofs as well as cars. So I'd highly recommend bringing your cars in during this event. If you have a garage, put them in there. If you have any pets that you leave outside, please bring them inside. This is not the type of event that you would want to leave your pets outdoors for. Just rather keep them safe than sorry. So just wanted to give you all some reminders of that. Then you also have your wind risk. Now, an expansive 30% chance for wind here has been issued all the way from Texas all into Shreveport to Monroe, from Bossier City, all the way down towards Alexandria, moving on through towards Hattiesburg, moving up all the way into Jackson. So massive risk right there. And that, whether you have a 5%, a 15%, or a 30%, 5 is in brown, 15 is in yellow, 30 is in red. Whether you're in those, whatever probability you have that probability of seeing damaging wind gusts over 58 miles per hour within 25 miles of a point. But then you see that pesky hatch risk again. And, for hail, what that meant is what you had stronger or larger sizes of hail. In this case, it indicates stronger gusts of wind. So now with that hatch risk, people who live in Jackson, Meridian, Vicksburg, Clinton, and Pearl, Mississippi, as well as maybe even Monroe, Louisiana, if you live in those areas, you guys actually have a 10% chance or greater of seeing gusty winds over 74 miles per hour, which will most certainly knock over trees and power lines. So that is definitely one of those things where not only are you going to want to be inside, but you're going to want to at least be in a sturdy structure so that if, just in case any sort of debris gets pushed over onto your house, you're in a safe spot to where the debris can't impact you. So that is one thing there. But on the same topic here, in regards to winds, we also have an expansive risk here for tornadoes, a massive 2% and 5% risk that is extended all the way from Dallas-Fort Worth, extended through to near Biloxi and Mobile, moving all the way up into places like Tuscaloosa, all the way through to Tupelo, the northern parts, excluding Memphis. So Memphis is in the 2% chance for tornadoes, moving all the way down into Shreveport. So if you live in places like Alexandria, if you live north of Lake Charles in Louisiana, if you live in Dallas-Fort Worth, or if you live in anywhere for the most part in Mississippi and western Alabama, you guys need to monitor this storm heavily, or this system heavily, that you have a 5% chance for tornadoes. You also have a 10% chance for tornadoes, localized in Jackson, Meridian, Vicksburg, Clinton, and Pearl, Mississippi, as well as areas near Alexandria and near Monroe in Louisiana. So this is definitely a system that we really need to monitor heavily as this continues to move on through, because this is not the system that we all want to stay outdoors for and to be ill prepared for. This one definitely seems to be an event that could potentially be strong, maybe even a severe weather outbreak already, that we could be calling it. So I most likely will be live streaming this event. It already has the 10% chance for tornadoes. Even if it had a 5% chance for tornadoes, I most likely would have live streamed already. But I'm already telling you guys right now that I'm going to be live streaming this event. So please stay tuned to that. And if you know anyone who lives in these areas, tell them that I'm going to be live streaming, because then they'll be able to get the coverage that they deserve and the coverage that they need, especially with some of these thunderstorms that will be pushing on through. So stay tuned for that. Then we also have our day 3 outlook. I almost went to the models and stuff like that, but then I remembered, hey, there's some storms that are going to linger on Saturday. And so here's a slight risk that'll be extending all the way up to just a little bit south of Atlanta. If we put up the cities right here, you can see Atlanta is very close to the slight risk. Same with Birmingham, but Birmingham's just a little bit out of the risk for right now. So New Orleans, Mobile, Tallahassee, Columbus, Georgia, you guys could all be in the slight risk here. I'm assuming this will be more or less for gusty winds and maybe even the chance for tornadoes. Spotty hail, I don't anticipate a whole lot, but still something to keep in mind with all that. And then this can also extend all the way up into Kentucky and Tennessee. So places like Nashville, Chattanooga, Bowling Green, Louisville, you guys, even Lexington, you guys could see some marginal risks for severe weather, a 1 out of 5 on the severe scale within those areas. All right, let's now go to the models. Let's go get some timings out for this event. So we'll go ahead and get to the precipitation type. We'll go to the regions and we'll look at it from the east here. So here's our storm right now. You can see your massive swirling low pressure right here with your cold front that extends all the way down. You have a lot of thunderstorms that are moving on through into places like central Tennessee, northern parts of Alabama and Mississippi, into central parts of Mississippi, and eastern parts of Louisiana. A lot of thunderstorms that are starting to march on through in some of these areas. And so as time goes along, this is the morning right now, and then head off into the afternoon, which would be around 17Z. By the way, for anyone who's curious about what the time is, this is actually in Eastern Daylight Time. So if you just subtract it by 1 hour, then you'll be able to get the accurate time as to what it is in Central Daylight Time. But a lot of scattered storms across the board here in places like Indiana, as well as Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky. For the most part, a lot of scattered storms and some more scattered storms that are starting to move off and pick up. This will be more towards the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock hours, and that'll push on through and create a lot of havoc for most people around there. I actually don't using Weather Bell as much as I thought I would. Interesting. Let's actually dissect it a bit more then. So this is the HRRR. HRRR model is an hourly model. So you can see more thunderstorms begin to start to develop across places like Kentucky in the early morning. As that pushes on through, you can see more of a line start to consolidate and push on through into places like Cincinnati. And that'll be just more of a widespread risk here for the most part. So a lot of thunderstorms that'll begin to start to ramp up at around the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock hours. As that pushes on through into the evening, more thunderstorms can linger into places like eastern Tennessee and start to move off into the Appalachians of the Carolinas. So if you live in these areas, then you guys have the chance for some gusty winds and some spotty hail, maybe even the chance for tornadoes. But for the most part, that's the timing here. 18Z, which would be around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, something like that. Thunderstorms will continue to move on through into central parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, and more thunderstorms will begin to linger into places like Georgia, but by then the risk is mainly over for places like Mississippi and all that, and it'll be more of a threat for the places towards your north. So that'll be the good news for the people who live down in the deep south, that once you guys are done with thunderstorms towards the morning into the afternoon, that's when your risk will mainly be over. All right, let's take a look at the NAM 3K for the event here on Friday. So Friday is pretty interesting for the most part because, as I said, there's some limiting factors that could come into play in regards to thunderstorm initiation on Friday, and we actually see that originally. But one thing that I want to make a note of here is by 17Z on Friday, which is around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when you can start seeing some thunderstorms that could initiate here in Oklahoma and Arkansas, and you can actually see them blow up rather quickly. But that'll push off through into the central to western parts of Arkansas, maybe even northern parts of Arkansas towards the 4 o'clock hours. More thunderstorms will begin to become more sporadic in places like central Alabama, but that is not your main threat. Then more storms will begin to start to pick up here into parts of central Oklahoma at around the 7 o'clock hours here. So Oklahoma City, you guys can actually see some potential severe weather from this because of the boundary from the low pressure system. And so this will continue to move on through. More thunderstorms begin to develop along the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas at around 8 or 9 o'clock in Central Daylight Time. So some more storms that could begin to form and push off, and that'll continue to basically create a widespread squall line, or QLCS, and a huge bow echo that we can actually see here on presentation, which tells me that this is a huge wind risk that'll be impacting places like Little Rock. So Little Rocks will start to get hit by this area. Texarkana will start to get hit by this area at around 11 o'clock in the evening, right overnight hours. All right, here's the main threat here. It's the overnight. This is an overnight event that will most likely cause some damage. And so if people need to get the word out that this thing is happening, and that this is not something that you can see during the day. This is going to be during the evening, overnight hours, and that is really scary for the most part. But then another thing to notice is that storms start to form off in Louisiana now. This is your midnight hours that'll start to push on through. So a bit more of a discrete cellular mode originally that starts to form in southern Louisiana or central Louisiana, and more storms start to form near the Monroe areas, near the border of Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. But behind it, you can still see that massive squall line here that creates some really gusty winds. I wouldn't even be surprised if these gusty winds got over that 74 mile per hour marker, just of how intense the squall line looks. But as this continues to move on through, you still have those storms that are out in front of the line. These storms could be tornadic. This will be reaching off towards places like Lafayette and Baton Rouge at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Something tells me that I'm going to be having my hands full and that I'm going to need a lot of coffee. So this is going to be really fun for me for the most part. But then as that continues to move on through, then Mississippi, for the most part of Mississippi, will get into that widespread thunderstorm risk at about, say, 4 o'clock in the morning. So very much so a widespread risk here. And this is when it starts heading into places like Alabama towards the early morning hours of Saturday. So definitely something that people are going to want to monitor as this pushes on through. As I said, a lot of gusty winds for the most part. And as that translates over towards Saturday, the original storms that form off out in front of the line in Louisiana, as that pushes on through into places like New Orleans at around, that would be 6 o'clock in the morning, as well as your thunderstorms that reach Birmingham and stuff like that at around 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. That will then translate into the new gusty wind threat, the new squall line, because the rear squall line will either actually merge or it will become too weak to be able to continue. So your new line of storms that'll push on through into Mobile at around, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, and that will continue to push on through into places like Atlanta at around, say, 11 o'clock in the morning, more towards the 11 o'clock in the afternoon, as well as Pensacola at around 11 o'clock in the afternoon. And this could create your strong gusty wind threat as this pushes on through. All right, so that's your brief overview, as well, not really a brief overview, but your timings, as well as your overview as to what conditions you can see. If you guys just wanted to know what was going to happen, you guys can click off the video right now. But for you weather enthusiasts and stuff like that want to see what it's like on the technical standpoint with these storms, then feel free to stick around towards from now all the way until the end of the video. But yep, this is your signal to say, hey, I told you the timings and what you guys can expect. You guys can take part in, you can part from this video and continue with the rest of your day for the most part. So let's take a look at some of the stuff here for today, just some of the general conditions. I'll head to the significant tornado parameter. Actually, you know what? We'll talk about, for the most part, what actually is happening on a convective standpoint. So CAPE for today, not a whole lot. This is the convective available potential energy. The buoyant force between warm air rising and cold air sinking. So the stronger the displacement with that, the larger the amounts of CAPE. The more amounts of CAPE, the stronger the thunderstorms typically will be, which is something that you'll see on Friday. but you typically want around 2,000 joules per kilogram in order to consider strong thunderstorms. We had some strong thunderstorms yesterday that had near 2,000 joules per kilogram cape, but for the most part, around 2,000 joules per kilogram is what you want to consider for the most part. So today, there is some areas in Alabama that get up to that threshold. I actually want to take a sounding real quickly, and it's decent, but the wind shear is kind of a mess. So we'll talk about that wind shear in a bit. But you actually have decent amounts of energy that is in Alabama and Georgia for the most part. So that is one thing that I did want to talk about for this event. If we move further north into the Ohio Valley, Ohio River Valley, more or less, I'll increase it in time here. And your cape, as you start to head further north, starts to deteriorate. So it starts to get into the 1,500, maybe even to the thousands, and maybe even sub-thousands as you head towards places like Ohio and Michigan. So not a whole lot of energy for the most part on a widespread scale here. Let's duplicate this. Let's move this down to the southeast. And let's go to the dew points for both of these. Your dew points, which is just a measure of energy here, well, not measure of energy, measure of moisture here in most of these spots. So typically you would want dew points from the 60s and above in order to consider some strong storms, or to consider that you have some moisture within some of these areas. And look at this. For the most part, these blues represent dew points in the low to mid 60s, maybe even upper 60s as you start to head closer towards the Gulf of Mexico. And so a lot of high dew points here for the most part before it starts to deteriorate over time. And so that's one thing that we'll have to note as well. You also have your dew points here in places like the Ohio River Valley that are not as high as the Deep South. You have some areas that get up to 60, but for the most part, it stays in the mid to upper 50s. So there is some moisture, but not a whole lot. So that's something to keep in mind there. Then you have your wind shear. We'll actually zoom out a bit more for that. So we're looking at the 500 millibar wind shear, which is a specific height in the sky. Your wind shear, which can be able to determine as to whether or not you have a gusty wind threat, and tornadoes. And so typically you want around, I'd say around 40 to 45 knots of wind shear at 500 millibars in order to consider tornadoes in general. Gusty winds you can get as low as you want and still get gusty winds. But for the most part, your wind shear stays above that. It stays at 45 to maybe even 50 knots, maybe even to 60 and 65 knots in some spots. So some really decent wind shear with this event here today. All right, let's talk a bit more about tomorrow's event from a technical standpoint. So the dew points across the area, I'll actually zoom on through if the HRRR model will allow me to, because for whatever reason it's not going to load. Don't know why. There we go. So dew points across the area. Look at this. Pretty high dew points for the most part. Most areas get up into the 60s. You actually have a dry line here, which can initiate thunderstorms. This is actually the reason why thunderstorms initiate over in Oklahoma, because you have some relatively high, low dew points over there that can create some thunderstorms along a boundary. But look at this. Dew points in the 60s for the most part, indicated in blue. Dew points in the 70s. Yes, I said 70s. That's really good. Indicated in the purples. So a relatively moist environment here for the most part. And it stays moist even overnight. I mean, look at this. It stays into the 70s even at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. This is some something really that we are going to have to consider. And look at this. This is your squall line that you can actually see here in the dew points. It actually drops significantly. So this is a very strong squall line that will have a drop off of around 10 degrees in dew points. I'm actually curious as to what the temperature drop off is on the squall line according to the HRRR, because if it's around 15 degrees, that is a massive squall line that will do some massive wind gusts. Could very well do some damage. So let's take a look here. And you can see that squall line, 69 degrees and 58 degrees. So another 10-degree drop off for the most part. But still, 70 and 59. So that's still a strong squall line, and upwards gusty winds you can see, and upwards of 60, 65 miles per hour, maybe even 70 miles per hour in some spots. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised, as I said, if it was over 75 miles per hour. So really something that we're going to want to monitor with that. Your CAPE, your convective available potential energy, for the most part is going to be relatively high. And one thing that you guys are going to notice, and I actually want to go back over here to the convective available potential energy here in the deep south. So we'll get to Texas in a bit. But one thing I want to notice is look at how much energy develops over the Gulf of Mexico on Thursday. And notice how it doesn't go away because of how warm and moist the Gulf of Mexico is. That actually adds a lot more. And so what happens is that you actually get some advection, or advection is just a big term for warm air moving. So this warm, moist air starts to advect into these places of the deep south, and you get some really interesting moisture return from that low pressure that's up in Oklahoma. And so with that being said, if you take a look at on Friday, that moisture just then moves into some of these places, and some of the areas indicated in orange, you can get up to 2,500 joules per kilogram. In red, you can get up to 3,000 joules per kilogram. And in some purple areas, you can even get up to 4,000 joules per kilogram, which is mind-boggling in my honest opinion. There's even some areas that can get up to almost 5,000 joules per kilogram here. This would be localized near Waynesville in Mississippi. So that is something to monitor as well. It'll be just to the east of Jackson. So right along the border of Alabama and Mississippi right there. That's where you can see some relatively high CAPE numbers. And that'll continue to maintain over the evening. I mean, look, the reds don't go away. It still stays in the 3,000 joules per kilogram. And as I said, you want at least 2,000 joules per kilogram in order to consider a strong thunderstorm. So the fact that it is still this high, even towards the overnight hours, this is what, 11 o'clock now? This is midnight here, and you still have CAPE over 2,000 joules per kilogram. So you have plenty of energy to feed these storms as this moves off overnight. Let's go back now to the Texas vicinity, the south central U.S. area, and now let's take a look at that CAPE over in this area. And look at this. You have some CAPE along this boundary, this line here. That is an upwards of 3,000 joules per kilogram, but across the board, well above 2,000 joules per kilogram into the 2,500 joules per kilogram vicinity. A lot of energy here for the most part. Your wind shear is pretty good for the most part as well. So we'll actually show you guys here in a second, as soon as this loads. I love pivotal weather, but pivotal weather sure does take its time. I will say that much. All right, so here's Friday morning. Your wind shear is pretty decent for the most part. And then it starts to get into the Friday morning into the Friday afternoon. And that's when wind shear starts to amplify again. So wind shear at 500 millibars start to get above that 40 to 45 knot threshold. Starts to get towards the 50 knots, maybe even 60 knots in some spots, before it continues to move on through. And so your wind shear is not too bad with this event. As I said, just a good example as to how storms, or some strong storms that form under 40 to 45 knot wind shear. El Reno, one of the strongest tornadoes ever recorded in recent history or recent memory, that had 300 some mile per hour winds with it, actually formed under 45 knot wind shear. So there is, whenever people say that there's not enough wind shear, just a reminder that there was so much energy that day, similar to this, not as much energy, but still had a lot of energy, and you had wind shear like that, and it didn't really need a whole lot to kick off for that event. So, all right, let's go into the worst case scenario indicator, the significant tornado parameter. Let's take a look at some of the things that could be happening there on Friday. So as soon as the HRRR will allow me to go forward with this, then I'll be able to see what all could be happening. Alrighty, so worst case scenario indicator shows a lot of activity over in Arkansas. So we'll take a sounding there first. There's a lot of capping inversion, so that's your limiting factor that I was talking about. So if you guys don't know what capping inversion is, basically it's like a lid on a water bottle, and if you try and squeeze that water bottle, the water won't shoot out because you have the lid on top. But if you like gradually open the lid more and more, if you squeeze the water bottle, then the lid will pop off and the water will shoot out exponentially. So that's what capping inversion basically does to storms. So you have a lot of capping inversion for the most part. And the same thing over in Texas. So that's kind of your risk for the most part with these storms. Not as much capping inversion, I will say, in Mississippi. You can take a look and see it's a little bit closer to 60. So that is something to keep in mind with all of that. Anyways, that's going to be it for me. As I said, if you guys did like the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, share this with friends and family, turn on notifications, and yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.